While cleaning my husband Adrian's car, I found a tube of personal lubricant in the glove compartment. Without a single word, I secretly swapped it with a tube of industrial-grade superglue, and what happened next forced our neighbors to make an emergency call to the fire department. I'm so glad you're here. If you're listening, help this story of revenge travel further by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. It would mean so much to know how far it's gone, so please share with me in the comments what city you're listening from. I sat alone in the living room, where the silence had grown thick, more suffocating than the humid air in a locked greenhouse. That stillness, which had become a constant, unwelcome guest, now felt as if it were squeezing the very life from me. My gaze drifted to the wall, to a small, elegant frame hanging beside the mantelpiece. Inside, pressed behind glass, was the single white rose from my wedding bouquet, a gift from my late grandmother. It was brittle and faded, a 40-year-old ghost of a promise. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a judgment, a relentless metronome counting down the moments of a life I was beginning to suspect was a beautiful, meticulously arranged lie. My husband, Adrian, had just come home from another one of his late-night client dinners. He didn't just look tired, he looked haunted, as if he were shouldering a secret far heavier than any briefcase. His face, once so open to me, was now a map of fatigue and guilt, etched with fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. He tossed his coat onto a chair with a weariness that felt performative, loosened his tie as if freeing himself from a noose, and collapsed onto our bed with a groan from the old springs, not even bothering to shower. The cloying scent of his expensive cologne filled the air, but it was tainted by something else, an alien fragrance, a sweet, musky perfume that was an intrusion, a brazen confession whispered from a life I didn't know he was living. Minutes later, the soft rumble of his snoring began, a sound that once brought me a sense of peace, but now sounded like a mocking lullaby. A lullaby for a fool. I rose from my chair, moving with the quiet, practiced motions of a wife of 4 decades, and began to tidy the small mess he'd left behind. His coat, his wallet, his phone. The phone's screen was still lit, a new message notification glowing like a sinister omen. My brow furrowed. Adrian was notoriously careless with his technology, always leaving things open. It was that carelessness I had once found endearing. Now it felt like arrogance. A morbid curiosity, a feeling both wrong and horribly necessary, took hold of me. I picked it up. The message was a short preview on the lock screen, a mere handful of words that would crack the foundation of my world. "You were amazing tonight, Dad." The flower emoji, a symbol of my own life's work, felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. My heart seized. The digital glow was a cruel mirror, reflecting a truth my mind refused to process. Dad. The word echoed in the silent room. Who would call him that, with such an intimate, affectionate tone? My thumb trembled as I swiped, hoping for more context, for some innocent explanation. But there was nothing else. Just a strange, unlisted number. A shiver traced its way down my spine, a profound, bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the night air. It felt like a draft from a secret door in my life that had just been blown open, revealing a dark, empty room I never knew existed. I glanced toward the bedroom. Adrian was turned on his side, his face peaceful in sleep, a stark and infuriating contrast to the hurricane raging inside of me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, guilty rhythm. I quickly placed the phone back on the table, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. I continued tidying on autopilot, my movements robotic. I gathered his clothes from the floor to take to the laundry. As I checked the pockets of his trousers, a habit born of 40 years of finding stray receipts and loose change. My fingers closed around a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a high-end steakhouse in Houston, dated for that very evening. I froze. Houston? He had told me he was meeting partners in Fort Worth. A small, bitter laugh escaped my lips. Adrian despised the drive to Fort Worth. Houston, on the other hand, was where his sister lived, a city filled with memories he cherished. But who had he been dining with while lying about his whereabouts? The receipt was for a party of two. A bottle of expensive Pinot Noir, the same vintage he'd bought for our 25th anniversary, a taste I had never forgotten. And two main courses, filet mignon and sea bass. I thought of the locket I'd bought just last month. It was a delicate silver heart, meant for Evelyn, my daughter-in-law, for her upcoming birthday. I'd planned to put a tiny photo of her and David inside, a symbol of the daughter I'd always wanted. The locket was still in its velvet box in my dresser, a tiny silver coffin for a hope I didn't know was already dead. With a silent, determined resolve, I took out my own phone and snapped a picture of the receipt and the text message on Adrian's screen. I didn't want to believe it, but a woman's intuition, a wife's intuition, is a deep, primal knowing. I felt myself standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the ground beneath my feet crumble into dust. I walked to the garage. Adrian's SUV was still warm, the air thick with the smell of exhaust and that cloying, sweet perfume. A small, cold dread twisted in my gut. I opened the passenger door, turned on my phone's flashlight, and began to search. Then I reached for the glove box. My fingers brushed against something cool and plastic. I pulled it out, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a tube of used personal lubricant, a sticky, damning piece of evidence. I stood there in the silent garage, staring at it. Adrian and I hadn't been intimate in years. He always blamed his age, his fatigue, his stress from work. So what was this for? The question wasn't a question at all. It was an answer. My rage was a cold, hard stone in my chest, and a new, more dangerous emotion began to stir within me. A need for truth, a need to expose the lie, no matter the cost. Something was happening, a betrayal deeper than I could fathom, and I had to find out what it was. But a small, cold voice in the back of my mind whispered a more terrifying question. Who was it? I stood there in the dark garage, the plastic tube of lubricant cold against my palm. It felt like holding a venomous secret, a tangible manifestation of my deepest fears. A survival instinct I didn't know I possessed kicked in, cutting through the paralysis. I put it back exactly where I'd found it, nestling it among old maps and a tire pressure gauge. I wiped my hands on a rag, scrubbing them raw, as if I could wash away the stain of his betrayal from my skin. My search became more methodical then, more deliberate. Under the back seat, tucked away in the dark, I found a small collection of crumpled cocktail napkins, soaked in that same sweet, musky perfume. It was a scent that screamed of secret meetings in dimly lit bars, a loud, vulgar shout of infidelity in the quiet sanctuary of my home. I took photos of everything, the lubricant, the napkins, capturing the sordid evidence with the cold, detached precision of a crime scene photographer. I closed the car door, the soft click echoing in the silence, and went back inside. The weight of what I'd found pressed down on me, heavier than any bag of soil I had ever lifted. I sat at the kitchen table until the first hint of dawn colored the windows, the images swirling in my head in a venomous carousel of doubt and certainty. The next morning, I was a ghost in my own house, moving through the motions of our life. I made a simple breakfast: 2 scrambled eggs, a piece of toast, and the strong black coffee Adrian liked. He came downstairs looking tired, his hair disheveled, and sat at the table. He took a sip of his coffee and set the mug down. "I have an important meeting today," he said, his voice husky, a rehearsed line he'd used 100 times before. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'll likely be home late." He was so good at this, I thought, my blood running cold. The easy lies, the casual tone. I managed a strained smile, though all I wanted to do was scream. Where is the meeting? With whom? In Houston again? But I held it all back, my rage a silent, contained fire. "All right, be careful," I replied. He gave me a light pat on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like an afterthought than affection, and left. The closing of the door left a profound silence in its wake, and me with a suspicion that was solidifying into a monstrous certainty. I washed the dishes one by one, the simple, rhythmic task a small anchor in the storm of my emotions. I couldn't just sit here. I needed the truth, hard and undeniable. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor and friend of 30 years. She had once mentioned, over a shared pot of tea, a private investigator who had helped her nephew through a difficult divorce. "Amelia, if you ever find yourself in a tight spot, I can give you Marcus's number," she had said. "He's the most discreet man I know." I never thought I would need it, but now I have no other choice. I dialed her number, my voice trembling. "Eleanor," I began, "I need to get in touch with that man you mentioned once. Marcus." There was a short, knowing silence on the other end of the line. "Amelia, what's going on? Is it Adrian?" I let out a long, shaky breath, my pride too raw to get into details over the phone. "I just need to know the truth, Eleanor. Can you help me?" A woman of profound intuition, she agreed without another question. An hour later, a message from Marcus appeared on my phone, asking to meet at a small cafe downtown. "Mrs. Sterling, please don't worry," he wrote. "I will help you." At noon, I was in the cafe, a tiny place that smelled of roasted coffee and old wood. I chose a secluded table in the corner. Marcus arrived shortly after, a middle-aged man with kind, philosophical eyes that seemed to see right through the surface of things. I handed him a small flash drive containing the photos I had taken. "This is everything I have," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I think my husband is cheating on me." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. He nodded, reviewing each image on his phone, his expression impassive. "I understand, Mrs. Sterling. I'll begin following your husband this afternoon. Go home. Don't do anything to arouse suspicion." I left the cafe and walked through the crowded streets, feeling a loneliness I had never known. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime built on a foundation of trust that was now crumbling beneath my feet. I had always believed Adrian was my rock, my anchor. Now, here I was, hiring a stranger to follow the man I had given my life to. That night, I was at my flagship flower shop, the familiar scent of earth, roses, and lavender a constant, soothing presence. While going over invoices for a large wedding order, my phone vibrated, a message from Marcus. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. I opened it. It was a photo of Adrian, handsome in a crisp blue shirt, entering a fancy restaurant. He was holding hands with a woman. I zoomed in on the image, and my world stopped turning. It was Evelyn, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a tight black dress, her makeup heavy, her lipstick a slash of crimson. They didn't look like a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. They looked like lovers, their bodies angled toward each other, a shared secret hanging in the air between them. I sank into my chair, the phone trembling in my hand. Evelyn? At family dinners, she and Adrian always acted so distant, barely making eye contact. I realized now it had been a masterful act, a performance for my benefit. More photos flooded in, In one, they were seated in a secluded booth, the table adorned with a single, perfect rose. Evelyn was leaning toward him, her smile intimate, as Adrian raised his glass to her with a look of unguarded tenderness. A crushing pain seized my chest. In 40 years, I had never seen him look at me like that, not even when we were young, and I was just a girl from a small Texas town with big dreams. It was a look of genuine adoration, of a love I thought was mine. Now it was hers. Then a video arrived. The clock on my computer screen read 2:00 a.m. I put in my headphones, a desperate attempt to keep the secret contained, and pressed play. In the video, Evelyn leaned close to Adrian's ear, whispering something that made him laugh, a deep, resonant sound that felt alien to me. Her eyes sparkled under the restaurant's soft lights. Then they stood to leave, and Adrian, ever the gentleman, opened the car door for her, not as a father would for his daughter, but as a man would for his lover. I replayed the video again and again, a self-inflicted torture. Each viewing was another stab to my heart. Evelyn, whom I had treated like my own daughter, whom I had taught how to arrange our family's traditional holiday centerpieces, and Adrian, the man I had built a life with. What were they doing behind my back? Behind David's back? The questions were a tidal wave, threatening to drown me. And in the depths of that cold, dark water, a different feeling began to take root. The icy resolve for justice. I saved all the photos and the video to the flash drive, my hands working on autopilot while my mind reeled in the chaotic storm. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe Adrian and Evelyn were capable of something so low, so cruel. But the evidence was right in front of me, a mountain of undeniable proof. I stayed late in the shop, surrounded by the sweet, cloying scent of lilies and roses that usually brought me peace. Tonight, it felt empty, a hollow comfort. I remembered the early days of the business when Adrian would help me carry heavy sacks of potting soil, his hands rough and calloused. We would laugh together in this small space, our dreams as big as the Texas sky. Now it all seemed like a distant memory, a beautiful lie I had lived for far too long. The next morning, I was in the back room of the shop, finalizing an order for a large hotel downtown, when my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. I wiped the dirt from my hands, my heart sinking when I saw it was another message from Marcus. It was just a short sentence. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm sending more evidence." I took a deep breath, trying to brace myself, but my hands still trembled as I opened the message. A new series of photos appeared. The first showed Adrian, dressed in his usual gray suit, leaving a nondescript office building near the main plaza. By his side was Evelyn, in a beige business dress, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, wearing huge dark sunglasses that were a pathetic attempt at anonymity. They were walking close together, their steps in sync, not like in-laws, but like co-conspirators. Their bodies were a testament to their forbidden bond. In the next photo, they were standing in front of a 4-star hotel, with gleaming glass doors and a polished gold sign. I zoomed in, desperately searching for some detail that could deny what I was seeing, but there was nothing. They looked too natural, too comfortable together, a part of a world I had been excluded from. Then came the video. I pressed play, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst, a frantic drum against my ribs. The shot was from a distance, but it was clear enough. Adrian and Evelyn were on a 3rd-floor balcony. His arm was wrapped around her waist, and she was resting her head on his shoulder, her long hair blowing softly in the wind. And then, like a physical blow, I saw them share a quick, proprietary kiss, stolen in the open air without a thought for who might see. It was brief, but it was enough to burn away the last spark of hope I had left. I replayed the video frame by frame, each image a new nail hammered into my soul. The hotel room curtain opened slightly, and Evelyn came out, running to hug Adrian. Her face lit up with a joy I had never seen on her. I slumped into a chair, clutching the edge of the table to keep myself from collapsing. A new text from Marcus appeared. They rented the room for the afternoon. It looks like they're staying the night. I'll keep watch. I read the message over and over, my throat tight, as if invisible hands were squeezing it. Just a few hours earlier, Adrian had sent me a text. Amelia, won't be home tonight. My sister had a plumbing emergency, so I have to go help her out. Get some rest. The tone was sweet and caring, just as it had always been. But now I knew it was all a lie, a well-constructed lie. He wasn't with his sister. He was here, in a 4-star hotel, with our daughter-in-law. I opened my portable hard drive and carefully saved every photo and every video. Each time I hit save, I forced myself to look at the image, to burn it into my memory. In the video, Adrian's gaze toward Evelyn was so tender. The way he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face reminded me of how he used to look at me, more than 30 years ago, when we were young, and I believed our love would last forever. A promise whispered under a starry Texas sky. Now, seeing that look directed at her, all I saw was deceit. I remembered family gatherings, all of us sitting around the dining table, a perfect tableau of a happy family. Evelyn always sat far from Adrian. Sometimes she even shot him looks of what I thought was annoyance. David would joke, "Mom, I think Evelyn can't stand Dad. She avoids him like the plague." I believed it too. I thought they simply didn't get along, that she was still finding her place in our family. Now I understand. It had all been a farce, a carefully choreographed dance of deception, performed for my benefit, for David's benefit. I felt like a fool, a blind, trusting wife, betrayed by 2 traitors right under my own roof. That night, I returned to the house that had been my home with Adrian for 40 years. It felt foreign now, a stage for ghosts and lies. I opened a drawer in my office and took out a thick manila envelope. My hands moved with a grim, steady determination. I printed all the evidence, photos of them leaving the office building, entering the hotel, and standing on the balcony. I printed stills from the video, capturing every damning frame. I carefully arranged them, sealed the envelope, and hid it at the bottom of a filing cabinet, beneath old business records. I paused, my eyes falling on a framed photo on my desk. It was from David and Evelyn's wedding a few years ago. Evelyn was smiling, hugging David tightly, while Adrian stood beside me, his arm resting proudly on my shoulder. Looking at it now, I wanted to smash the glass, to rip their smiling faces from my life. Just before dawn, I heard the front door open. Adrian staggered in, smelling of whiskey. "That sister of mine," he mumbled, his eyes bloodshot. "Her plumbing is a disaster. I'm dead tired." I was in the kitchen, a glass of water in my hand, watching him perform. He was rubbing salt in a wound he didn't know was gaping open. "Go rest," I replied, my voice a calm, practiced mask. "You have a long day tomorrow." He nodded, gave me that same dismissive pat on the shoulder, and dragged himself to the bedroom. Minutes later, he was snoring peacefully, as if he hadn't just spent the night in a hotel with our son's wife. I stood in the quiet house, listening to the sound of his oblivious sleep. He didn't know I was no longer grieving. I was planning. When I was certain Adrian was deeply asleep, my phone vibrated, a silent buzz against the kitchen table. It was a call from Marcus. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Mrs. Sterling, I recorded their conversation in the hotel parking lot. I used some specialized equipment. They didn't have a clue. I'm sending the file to you now. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, heavy rhythm, but my voice was steady. Thank you, Marcus. Send it. Minutes later, an audio file appeared in my messages. I put on my headphones, sat at the table in the pre-dawn gloom, and pressed play. The first thing I heard was Evelyn's voice, sharp and ambitious, a stranger's voice. Dad, you need to hurry up with that fake contract. I want that whole chain of shops. I want that old hag out of the house. A physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Then came Adrian's voice, deep and confident, laced with a smugness that turned my stomach. Don't worry about the papers. Amelia doesn't know a thing. Leave it in my hands. She trusts me too much. It felt like a knife twisting in my heart. They weren't just cheating on me. They were planning to dismantle my life's work, to take everything I had built. Amelia's blooms. All the sweat, the tears, the sleepless nights spent nurturing seedlings and negotiating with suppliers. It was all mine. Adrian had never once gotten his hands dirty in the soil. He never worked the counter or signed contracts with hotels. And now he and Evelyn wanted to take it all away. To kick me out of the house I had made a home. I copied the audio to the flash drive with the rest of the evidence, my composure a thin sheet of ice over a raging sea. That night, at dinner, I sat across from Adrian under the warm kitchen light that gave his face a strange, distorted glow. He ate his steak and spoke in a monotone, as if the world wasn't about to end. Amelia, he began, swirling the wine in his glass. I have to sign some important business papers this week. Maybe you should look them over. They're a bit complicated. I heard Evelyn's voice in my head. Hurry up with that fake contract. He was testing the waters. He wanted to drag me into his own dirty scheme. I managed a dry smile, the perfect facade of a wife too tired to argue. Yes, I'll look at them later. I'm tired now. He nodded, satisfied, taking a long sip of wine. Behind that placid expression was a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had a few more glasses. His face grew flushed, and he started slurring his words about some difficult client. I nodded as if I were listening, but inside I was screaming. When he finally got up, staggering slightly and headed for the bedroom, I cleared the table. My every move was slow, deliberate, containing the fury that was boiling just beneath the surface. He threw himself onto the bed and was snoring within minutes, leaving his car keys on the nightstand. They gleamed under the dim light of the bedside lamp, a siren's call to my revenge. I stared at them, my heart pounding in my chest. This was my chance, my moment. I entered the bedroom silently, each step a careful negotiation between pain and resolve. I grabbed the keys, their cold metal a shock against my skin, and went straight to the garage. The night was quiet, hushed, as if the world were holding its breath. The only sound was the chirping of crickets outside, a soundtrack to my silent fury. I turned on my phone's flashlight, the weak beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate Adrian's old SUV, a silent accomplice in his betrayal. I opened the glove compartment, and there it was, the tube of lubricant, a monument to their infidelity. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of their dirty secret. I took it to the kitchen, placed it on the counter like a piece of evidence, and washed my hands with lemon soap, scrubbing until my skin was raw. The fresh scent did nothing to calm my anger, but it helped me focus. From a drawer filled with tools for the shop, I took out a tube of clear industrial superglue, the same kind I used to repair broken ceramic pots. It was a tool of my trade, now a weapon of my revenge. I carefully unscrewed the lubricant's cap and drop by drop, filled the tube with the glue until it was full. I wiped the nozzle clean, shook it gently, and squeezed a tiny amount onto a paper towel. It came out smoothly, its consistency almost identical to the original. At a glance, no one would ever notice the difference. A faint, cold smile touched my lips. This was the first step. I put the tube back in the glove compartment, adjusting the car's floor mat just as it was. I closed the door softly and, on a final impulse, opened the trunk. Amidst a clutter of old newspapers and an empty water bottle, an unused condom lay in the corner. My heart skipped a beat, but I wasn't surprised anymore. I took a picture with my phone, adding it to the growing collection. Back in the house, I placed the keys exactly where I'd found them. I grabbed an old gardening book and sat on the living room sofa, pretending to read. The dim light fell on the pages, but the words were a blur. My head was spinning. I thought of David, my son, who believed he was living a happy life, who had no idea his own father and his wife were betraying him. How could I tell him? I thought of my business, of the 40 years of work he was so willing to throw away. An hour later, Adrian woke and stumbled into the kitchen for a glass of water. He saw the keys on the counter, then looked at me. "Still not sleeping, Amelia?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I smiled, a perfect, placid mask. "No, just reading a bit. Go back to bed." He nodded and returned to the bedroom, his snores resuming almost immediately. I looked toward the closed door, at the stranger who was once my husband. This man, who had promised to stand by me until the end, was now planning to destroy everything I loved most. But he didn't know that I had already started my counterattack. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for them to walk into it. At dawn, I rose. The first timid rays of sunlight were just beginning to filter through the kitchen window. I stood there, a cup of cold coffee in my hand, my gaze fixed on a heavy cast-iron skillet I had placed on the stove the night before. This was the final piece of my plan, a simple smoke trap, but one that would be devastatingly effective. I had tied a thin, nearly invisible fishing line to the stove's ignition knob. I ran the line discreetly along the baseboard, over to the window, and attached the end to an old, heavy coffee can I'd found in the pantry. All I had to do was pull it from a distance, and the flame would ignite the oil in the skillet, creating a thick, black smoke, enough to alarm the entire neighborhood. I opened the kitchen window just a crack, enough for the smoke to escape. I had tested it once, briefly, the day before. The smoke had risen quickly, coiling like a serpent, a dark warning. I put on a light jacket, grabbed my large purse, and prepared to leave for my fictional trip. Before I left, I went into the bedroom and gently shook Adrian's shoulder. "I have to go now," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm heading to that floral expo. I'll probably be back late tonight." He opened his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't concern but relief shining in their groggy depths. "An expo?" he asked, taking my hand with a feigned tenderness that made my skin crawl. "Of course. Go ahead. I'll handle things here." That spark in his eyes, the slight curve of his lips, as if a great weight had been lifted, pierced my chest. He wanted me gone, and I knew exactly why. I smiled and nodded. "Thanks. I'll call you if I get back late." As he rolled over and buried his face in his pillow, he had no idea he was lying in the bed that would soon become his prison. Instead of going to the bus station, I walked directly across the street to Mrs. Henderson's house. She opened the door, her face etched with worry when she saw my purse. "Amelia, what are you doing up so early? Is something wrong?" I forced a smile. "Eleanor, can I stay here for a few hours? I need to watch my house." She frowned, her intuitive eyes searching mine, but she didn't press. She simply poured me a cup of hot coffee and gave me a chair by her living room window, a perfect vantage point. Around 10 a.m., a taxi pulled up. Evelyn got out, wearing a light floral sundress and dark sunglasses, as if she were a celebrity hiding from the paparazzi. Adrian opened the front door, looked around furtively, and then quickly ushered her inside. I gripped my coffee cup, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. "It's time," I murmured to myself. I pulled out my phone and activated the app connected to the small, high-quality audio recorder I had hidden behind the bookshelf in our bedroom. The sounds started coming through my headphones. Evelyn's light laughter, the clinking of glasses, the heavy thud of footsteps moving toward the bedroom. Then I heard Adrian's deep voice, smug and triumphant. "See? No more hiding in hotels." Evelyn giggled. "You really know how to pick your moments. The old hag is gone, right?" I bit my lip, hard, holding back the surge of white-hot rage as I heard her call me that name with such casual contempt. Then, the sounds I had been dreading and waiting for began. The creaking of the bed, the rustling of clothes. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, "Just a little longer, Amelia. Just a little longer." A few minutes later, it came. A sudden piercing scream from Evelyn. "What the hell is this? Adrian, we're stuck." Her voice was filled with a raw, rising panic. Adrian growled, "Shut up! Wait, let me see what's wrong." I smiled. My fingers, steady and sure, found the small loop I had made in the fishing line, which I had discreetly fed through Mrs. Henderson's mail slot. I gave it a sharp, firm pull. Across the street, the string tightened. The stove's knob turned. The igniter clicked. The skillet of oil caught fire. Black smoke billowed out of my kitchen window in thick, choking spirals, spreading into the morning air like an alarm signal. Mrs. Henderson gasped beside me. "Amelia, your house is on fire!" I feigned a look of terror, but inside I felt a strange, cold calm. Neighbors started pouring out of their houses, pointing and shouting. "It's the Sterling's place! Call 911!" Mr. Miller from next door quickly pulled out his phone. I stayed there, holding my coffee cup, my eyes fixed on my house. In my headphones, Evelyn's voice had escalated to a desperate, hysterical shriek. "Adrian, do something! I can't move!" Adrian's voice roared back, laced with his own terror. "Don't scream! I'm trying!" But I knew they couldn't do anything. The industrial superglue was at work, trapping them in the most humiliating moment of their lives. I imagined them struggling, naked and afraid, and a dark part of me felt a grim satisfaction. They had pushed me to this. They wanted to take my business, my home, my honor. Now they would pay. The smoke continued to rise, getting thicker, blacker. The neighbors were crowding on the sidewalk, their voices a rising chorus of panic. "Where's Amelia?" someone asked. "I thought she went out of town for work," another replied. Mrs. Henderson stood beside me, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, but she said nothing. She just squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of solidarity. Just 10 minutes later, the wail of a fire truck siren ripped through the suburban quiet. The red engine sped down the street and skidded to a stop in front of my house. I watched as my son, David, jumped out of the driver's seat, his fire chief's helmet on, his face tense with professional focus. "Get the equipment ready," he shouted to his team. "There might be people inside." I looked at him, my strong, honorable son, and felt a sharp, stabbing pain. He was about to face the cruelest truth of his life. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to say, "I'm so sorry, David," but I couldn't. I had to let it play out. I stayed still, a silent director in the wings, as my son prepared to break down the door to his own personal hell. The smoke from the kitchen, thick and acrid, was the perfect theatrical effect. It gave David and his team every reason to believe there was a serious fire. My son led the way, swinging a sledgehammer that shattered the front door with a sickening crack. The sound echoed down the quiet street, a percussive beat marking the end of our family as we knew it. His teammates followed him in, their faces grim, dragging hoses and carrying extinguishers. Through my headphones, I could hear the chaos inside the bedroom escalating, Adrian's desperate shouts mingling with Evelyn's panicked sobs. "Do something, Adrian! For God's sake, I can't move!" David burst into the bedroom. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. I could hear the sharp, choked sound he made, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. I heard one of the firefighters behind him murmur, "Oh my God." Another one let out a nervous, quickly suppressed laugh. Then David's voice, raw and strained, cracked through the air. Silence. I knew that cry wasn't just an order to his men. It was his last, desperate attempt to hold on to some semblance of control as his world imploded. The humiliation was no longer a private affair. It was now a spectacle for the entire fire team, and soon, for the entire neighborhood. A young firefighter ran out of the house and reported to an officer on the lawn. "Chief, the smoke is under control. It was just a small oil fire in the kitchen. Nothing serious." But David didn't emerge from the house. I knew he was still in that bedroom, frozen, staring at the wreckage of his life. His own father and his wife, naked and fused together in an adulterous embrace. The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to crowd closer, pointing and whispering. "What's happening in there?" "It's Adrian and his daughter-in-law," a woman shrieked, her voice a mixture of shock and morbid excitement. Mrs. Henderson, standing beside me, silently took out her phone and began recording as the firefighters, after a moment of stunned hesitation, had to act. They wrapped sheets around Adrian and Evelyn, a futile attempt to cover their conjoined bodies, and began carrying them out on stretchers. I could hear Evelyn's broken sobs. "Please do something, it hurts. I can't stand it anymore." Adrian just mumbled weakly, his face a mask of ashen horror. "Don't let anyone see us." But the whole world had already seen. The crowd was a sea of disgusted faces, mocking sneers, and disappointed shakes of the head. "What a disgrace!" a man exclaimed. "Poor Amelia! How could this happen?" I slipped into the crowd, pretending to have just rushed back from the bus station, my face a carefully constructed mask of shock and confusion. Daniel finally emerged from the house, his arms hanging limply at his sides, his face as pale as a ghost. His teammates avoided his gaze, quietly packing up their tools. I knew that the shock wasn't just seeing them stuck together. It was the crushing weight of a double betrayal from the two people he loved most. I wanted to run and hug him, but I held back, letting Mrs. Henderson silently guide me to my car to follow the ambulance to the hospital. Hours later, a doctor emerged from the operating room, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Mrs. Sterling," he said in a low voice, "we managed to separate them. There's no serious damage, but they'll need this skin ointment for the irritation." I nodded, pretending to be relieved, my fingers discreetly brushing against my purse, where I had hidden a tube of extra hot chili paste I had prepared. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice trembling for effect. "Can I see them?" He nodded. At the nurse's station, a kind young woman looked at me with deep compassion. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry you're going through this." As she turned to grab a form, I made the switch. My hands moved quickly, confidently. I entered the hospital room, feigning concern. "Adrian, Evelyn, are you okay?" Evelyn was in her bed, her eyes red and swollen, unable to look at me. Adrian, still pale, mumbled, "Amelia, I can explain." I didn't let him finish. I placed the tube on the table beside his bed and left. Minutes later, a gut-wrenching scream tore through the hallway. "It burns! My skin is on fire!" Julian was writhing in his bed, cursing. The hallway erupted. "It's them," an old woman whispered to her son. "The couple from that video on the internet this morning. The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law." Mrs. Henderson's video had already gone viral. When the chaos subsided, David entered the room. I had called him from the hospital waiting room, telling him exactly where to find the manila envelope and the 2 sets of divorce papers I had ready. He handed me the folder, his gaze empty. I opened it, took out the documents, and placed them on the table in front of Adrian and Evelyn. 40 years of marriage end here, I said, my voice cold and firm. Sign these, then disappear from my life and my son's life. Evelyn collapsed into sobs, looking at David. "Honey, forgive me, please." But David just stared at her, his expression as hard as stone, before turning and walking out without a word. I found him leaning against the wall in the hallway, his head in his hands. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken. "Why did it have to be Dad? Why her?" I didn't have an answer. I just hugged him tightly, sharing his pain with my own. In that moment, I knew that Adrian and Evelyn had lost everything, but David and I had lost a family. All I could hope was that, with time, we would find peace. A few weeks later, my flower shop was busier than ever. People came in not just for the flowers, but to offer a handshake, a kind word. "Amelia, you are so strong," Mrs. Henderson said, buying a bouquet of bright sunflowers. "This whole neighborhood is proud of you." I smiled and thanked her. Daniel moved in with me right after that day. He didn't talk much about what happened, but he was there. He helped run the shop, his presence a quiet, steady comfort. One evening, as we were closing up, he turned to me with a faint smile, the first I'd seen in weeks. "Mom, can you teach me how to arrange the centerpieces for the Grand Hotel order?" he asked. "The way you do it?" "All right," I replied, my heart swelling with a cautious hope. "But you have to help me with the wiring." He nodded. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of roses and fresh earth, I felt that we were slowly but surely beginning to heal. They had tried to take my garden, but they had failed. I still had my blooms. I still had my son. And most importantly, I still had myself. So, that's my story. It's a harsh reminder that betrayal can come from the people closest to us, but it also proves that you always have the power to write your own ending. You can let the weeds take over, or you can pull them out by the root and replant something beautiful in their place. It makes me wonder, and I want to ask you all, where do you draw the line between forgiveness and justice? It's a difficult question, and there's no right answer, but I'm genuinely curious to hear your perspective in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, you won't want to miss the next one. I'll be telling the incredible story of a woman who discovered her late husband was living a double life, and how she used his own secrets to empower a community of women he wronged. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being a part of this community. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. See you next time.